Have you ever wanted to make a braid quilt but were worried that it was difficult or maybe hard to do? Are you willing to learn a new technique but would like it to be fairly simple, easy to learn, and most of all fun? Well, I've got you covered. Hi, I'm Kate Colleran, quilt pattern designer, fabric designer, author, and quilt teacher, and I have a book with C&T Publishing called Patchwork Braids, 13 quick and easy quilted projects that will let you know that it is so easy to make braids. And you'll find as you work through the projects in the book why I say making braids is almost goof-proof. You know, I made my first braid quilt back from my book, Smash Your Pre-Cut Stash. And once I made that first quilt, well, I was hooked because making braids is fun. You know, there's some basic steps to making a braid, right? You pick your fabrics, you cut your fabric into strips, you cut the braid shapes, you sew that braid together, and then the magic happens when you go to trim it, right? Because you trim the pieces off the top and the bottom, you trim the sides and all the wobbly bits go away, and then next thing you know, you've got this wonderful braid that you can use as the block in a quilt, as the main feature in a quilt, or even as an accent in another project. And I've actually got a video that shows you how to do the cutting and sewing of the braids that you can reference to get you started. But one of the things I love about braids is you don't just have to make a basic braid. Once you learn that technique, well, then you can start thinking about doing other things with braids, like adding squares or using different strip sizes. And that's really how the idea for the book came into being, because I wanted to be able to show you different ways to make braids and use braids. So in the quilt book, we have, lots of different projects, quilts, smaller things, table runners, pillows, different types of braids that you can all mix and match and put together. So how about if I show you some of the projects from the quilt? Now the first one from the quilt, from the book. So the first one is this quilt behind me, and it's called Blue Diamond Iris. And the reason I called it Blue Diamond Iris is I named all the quilts in the book after flowers because I wanted the book to just feel like, I don't know, a garden of quilty goodness. And as you can see, this quilt that's got a little thread on it right here, there we go. This quilt is a complementary color scheme, right? It's got some blue and it's got orange. And that's a great color scheme, two colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel, and it's bold and it's dramatic. And I use these wonderful solids to really give it that bold and dramatic feel. Now, the best thing about a quilt like this is one, it's fairly simple to put together, and two, you don't have to use this color scheme. You can use any color scheme that you like. Maybe you have two favorite colors that you want to put together, or maybe you want to use prints. Maybe you want to use a mix of prints and solids, and that's okay. You could even make it scrappy. Maybe you could do darks on one side and lights on the other, and then pick your favorite colors to be the sashing in between. Well, you might be thinking, Kate, that's a big quilt to start with. I haven't made braids before. Well, don't worry, I have you covered, because I also have in the basic braid chapter a little placemat. Isn't it cute? Now I picked my favorite color scheme, which is blue and green. And I just love these sort of tone-on-tone textured prints that I did in the placemat. And that's a great way to get started. Make a small project, learn the basic braid, right? And then you can decorate your table. Now, that's just the first chapter where we have a couple of projects about how to use and make basic braids. And then we move on to other things. So another chapter in the book talks about how to add squares to your braid, which is super simple to do. You just add the squares to some of the braid pieces before you get started and then sew your braid. Easy peasy. What I love about adding squares is how it adds this visual interest to your braid and draws your eye up and down the braid. Now this small project is called Arrow Leaf in the book. And can't you see how the yellow just brings your eye up and down the braid? Now I don't have a huge value contrast with my little squares in the center of my braid. But even though there's not a big value contrast, it still draws your eye up and down the braid. Now another project in the book using braids is this fun crib quilt. And one of the things that I love about this quilt is that I chose to do a pink quilt, But I added this dark blue for the squares, which really is a great value change. It adds a lot of drama and a little bit of interest to the quilt. Isn't that fun? Now, another thing you can do with braids, and we have a whole nother chapter on how to use strips of different widths. And it's a really fun, simple technique. You just have to make sure that you add the same width strip in pairs. 2 of one size, 2 of another, 2 of one size, 2 of another. And then it's easy peasy, you build your braid exactly the same way. One of the quilts in the book, I called it Clementine. And I used these really beautiful batiks. And what I love about it is that it gives texture. All the varied strip widths give texture to this braid. The idea behind this whole quilt was thinking about like a formal garden. So here are the flowers and here are the rows of plants, and you wander around your formal garden. But isn't this fun? Can you see how I used 4 different greens? And I've got skinny strips and wider strips and even wider strips. And I put the skinny strips in between all the others, and it really does give it a lot of interest. Now, what other things can you do with braids? Well, we've talked about doing basic braids and adding squares and using varying strip sizes. The other thing is you can use piece strips to make braids. Now, one thing you might be thinking right away is, what kind of shapes could I make? Well, right away we think of a tree, right? Because if you think about it, the braid shape lends itself to being a tree block. So easy, right? But what else could we do? Well, one of the quilts in the book, in our piece strip chapter, does this beautiful flower. I love this flower. Isn't it wonderful? And I happened to use ombres when I made this block, which then lets each of the individual flowers look differently, just like in nature. One of the other smaller projects in the book, in the piece chapter, is this really fun runner. Isn't that great? And we just made piece strips and made them into braids. So there's a lot of different size projects, a lot of different types of projects, and a lot of different ways that you can use your braids. And you haven't even seen all the projects. There's bags in there, there's pillows in there. Oh, I can't wait for you to see the pillows. They're so cute. There's a quilt that does a technique that I like to call a faux braid. And there's an amazing sampler quilt at the end of the book that uses a lot of the different techniques so you can make your own quilt that's a whole garden of quilty goodness. Well, I hope you will enjoy making and learning all about braids and have as much fun making them as I had making them, because it really is a great technique to add to your quilter's toolbox. So what's your next step? Go grab the book and get started making braids, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. Thanks for watching. Happy quilting!